Hey guys, and welcome to PowerPoint number 17. Okay, this PowerPoint is titled Articles of Confederation, Northwest Ordinance, Post-War Economy, and Constitutional Convention. So make sure you're taking notes, and our first slide is talking about the Articles of Confederation. So when Americans were creating the new government, now let me back up and say this too. Remember, America has just won its independence. They're creating their own country, so they have to start thinking about what type of government they're going to have. So when they were creating their new government, people were concerned about giving too much power to the government or ruler. They had just left a situation in being part of Britain where there was a king and there was too much power with the king. So they didn't want that. They didn't want one person holding all the power. So the Articles of Confederation were established that Congress could levy taxes, Congress could not control foreign trade, Congress could not make states follow laws. All 13 states had to agree to any amendments. So they were creating these laws where Congress didn't have a lot of power. Most of the power lied within the states. So all states had to approve the Articles of Confederation. So it was the basis of the government early on, and it gave states most of the power. Okay, so problems with the Confederation. So as they start looking into the Confederation and all the government that goes along with it, the national government had no power to raise money through taxes. So they could not gain any money to pay off all their debts or to pay soldiers or to have government funds. So the national government had no power to create that money through taxes. Like today we pay taxes. It was not the same way back then. The national government had no power to manage trade either. So merchants had trouble following different state laws and trade slowed down. So if you were from New York and you went down and traded to the South, each state had different laws. So sometimes what you could do in one state, you could not do in another, okay? And that slowed the trade. The national government had no power to raise an army, so the nation could not defend itself. So the government couldn't say, let's enlist men or let's recruit men to have in our army and then let's pay them, because one, they didn't have money, and two, they couldn't do that. All the power lied within the states. The national government had no power to make states follow laws. So states did whatever they wanted to. So if the government couldn't control the states, then what was the point? Every state should have almost been its own country because they followed their own rules. The national government had no power to support the currency. So each state had its own currency, and the value of the currencies were different. Okay, so what we have today, currencies, are, we have dollar bills, and we have the quarter, the penny, the dime, the nickel. We have all these different forms, but my dollar bill in New Mexico, it works in Texas too. That was not the case back then. A dollar bill from New Mexico, well, New Mexico wasn't a state, but a dollar bill from, per se, Virginia did not work as the same dollar bill in Pennsylvania. It just didn't. Each state had their own type of currency or own printed money is what that is. So here's some printed money over here in our pictures on the side. Okay, so moving on to the next thing we're going to talk about. So that was the problems with the government. This is talking about problems with land. So the Ordinance of 1785, this was a law that set up a process to survey and sell land north of the Ohio River. So we're talking about kind of in the Great Lakes region. The way that they did that is because the Britain Army controlled that area during and into the American Revolution. Now that they gained that land, they wanted to divide it up and sell it. So townships were 6 miles long and 6 miles wide. They were divided into 36 sections of 640 acres. Okay, so how does that work? Well, a mile by a mile in today's terms is a section, okay? So if you're thinking about that, so there's 640 acres in one section. And so So if you have, and this plot map thing over here on the side here is explaining how big sections are. How 160 acres is going to be a quarter of that. And so today most plots and lands are divided into quarter sections or sections, okay? Sometimes half sections, but that's kind of what it looks like today, okay? So it's still the same thing, and that's kind of where plots kind of came from at this point in time. Okay, so then the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, so after they kind of started dividing that up, this created a single territory from lands north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi River. Okay, so what they're talking about is over here in this map, you can see that the pink is already the states that were established. There were territories, which was the dark or kind of the orangish brown color. That would have been the territory that they're talking about. And it says unorganized territory. Everything else in gray really hadn't been established yet, okay? Texas was still part of, not really part of the United States, and New Mexico definitely wasn't part. It was still part of New Spain and Mexico. Okay, so a territory could become a state by applying for statehood when it had 60,000 residents. Okay, so what we're going to start seeing is more and more of these places are going to gain these statehood as time goes on. Settlers had freedom of religion and trial by jury rights. Okay, even if you lived in a territory, you still had rights. You just didn't have representation in government. Okay, so settlers had freedom of religion and trial by jury. This ordinance attempted to stop the spread of slavery because it outlawed slavery and involuntary servitude in the territory. So this was kind of the beginning of when we really see a push against slavery. Okay, it is another almost 80 years before slavery is completely ended. It's not ended until the 1860s, but we start seeing lawmakers starting to push to have slavery ended at this point in time. Okay. All right. So then there's the Land Act of 1800. So we're moving on to about another 10, 15 years from that. And this made it easier for people to buy land in the territory. So as the territories are opening up and they're wanting people to travel there and settle the land, people could buy land in the territory of at least 320 acres. So that's a half section. So that'd be like, basically a half mile by a mile would be a half section at $2 an acre. Okay, so I wish land was $2 an acre today. Some land can be anywhere from $500 an acre to thousands of dollars an acre, just depending on where you are located and how good the land is. But $2 an acre seems like nothing. Of course, this was, 200 years ago. The buyer could pay off half of the money immediately and the rest in 4 yearly payments. So you basically still had to have $320 up front to purchase the land, which was a lot of money back then. Okay. So here's some vocabulary that we're going to talk about. So we have bicameral, having two separate lawmaking chambers. We have a bicameral lawmaking system today. Our legislative branch of government, remember there's three branches of government: the executive, which is the president; the legislative, which is the House and the Senate; and then, of course, the judicial, that is made up of the 9 Supreme Court justices. But the bicameral branch, which means the House of Representatives and the senators, that means that there's two different lawmaking groups. And we'll get into that a lot in more depth as we get into more PowerPoints, but we still have the same basis of government today, okay? Republic is a government in which citizens rule through elected representatives. We still have that type of government today too, where we elect people to represent us in the actual Senate or the House of Representatives or even president. Sometimes the people you vote for aren't the people elected, but we still get the opportunity to vote for people, okay? And then there's an ordinance. An ordinance is just basically a law. And then depreciate is to fall in value. Now, depreciate is something that happens even today. I mean, definitely happened back then, but so an easy way for you to think about depreciation is when you buy a car, a brand new car, and it's on, you buy it and you drive it off the lot and it's yours. It's not, you can't turn around and go right back in there and sell it that same day for the exact same price you bought it for. It immediately depreciates. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but that's just how it works, okay? All right, the post-war economy. So this is talking about how the economy was affected after the American Revolution. So the continental currency depreciated and was worth almost nothing. So when they were fighting in the war, they had a currency that the Continental Army and everybody used. It depreciated, and nobody used that anymore. And so money that you had during the wars was worth nothing now. The Continental Congress had money problems because it had a large debt to repay, and it had no way to raise money. American merchants were having trouble with Britain because the British were blocking Americans from the West Indies and other British markets. So America was having a lot of trouble because they just won their freedom, but they didn't have any money, and they weren't being able to capitalize on trade because Britain was blocking them out. And it was a rough time, the first 20 or 30 years of America being a new country. The U.S. were having trouble with Spain because Spain closed the lower Mississippi River to American shipping in 1784. Okay, so the Mississippi River, most of you know that it starts up kind of past the Great Lakes area, almost all the way to Canada. And when I say it starts there, that's where the headwaters is. That's where it feeds from, and then it expels into the Gulf of Mexico, right down by Louisiana. So the southern part of it, near Louisiana, present-day Louisiana, was the part that Spain controlled, and they blocked it. So America couldn't get any type of trade happening down there as well. And so that was causing trouble. So America was having a little bit of a hard time in its first few years after the war. Okay, our next slide is Shays' Rebellion. So they had this rebellion where farmers were angry because they could not sell their goods because of recession. So as the economy is struggling, they couldn't sell their goods, and they were being jailed or put into jail for not paying the taxes and the debt that they owed on either their land or on their goods or whatever it was. And many of these farmers were soldiers who had not been paid for their service. So it was a vicious cycle there that wasn't working out for the people of America, and so they had a rebellion. Daniel Shays led a group that forced courts in western Massachusetts to close, and he tried to take over the federal arsenal in Springfield. So they were upset. And rightfully so. They had been soldiers. They weren't getting paid. The economy was doing poorly, so there was recession, and they blamed the government. So Shays' Rebellion had several effects. Farmers wanted a government that would raise money and pay debts. They said, we have to have some way to make money, and they have to have a way to pay if a person works for the government. The wealthy wanted the government to be able to protect them. So they needed a way to rely on the government, is basically what it said there. Okay, so that was Shays' Rebellion. Okay, our next thing here is the Constitutional Convention. So as the economy's struggling and everybody's falling apart, the Constitutional Convention was created. It was designed to discuss trade issues and consider possible changes to the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation just weren't working. The federal government did not have enough power. So George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Edmund Randolph, and William Patterson attended the convention, along with a lot of other people, but those were notable people that attended. The convention was led by George Washington, and each state had one vote. Majority vote ruled, and sessions were closed to the public. So they began discussing, how can we fix the Articles of Confederation? How can we make our government better? Because right now it's not working. Okay, and that was what was happening with the Constitutional Convention. Okay, so that's our last slide. Our next PowerPoint will get more into how they're going to change the government. All right, make sure you're taking notes, and if you have any questions, shoot me a message.